So, as Steve mentioned before, my name is Ryan Haden. I teach and do research at Ohio State ATI in Worcester. And so many of you guys may have children that you are thinking of sending to college at Ohio State. And I would encourage you guys to consider ATI as a good opportunity for getting them off to a good start. Today, what I'd like to speak about is a topic that has come up among a lot of growers. It's a question that I get quite frequently, and we decided to incorporate it into the Tri-State fertility recommendations as one aspect that we were taking a look at. And the reason that we decided to focus on this question was, in-furrow starter fertilizers are one of the many things that have changed in agriculture over the last several decades. And one thing I will note is the technology has changed so that placing liquid products in furrow with the seed has become a lot more convenient, and more people have the capacity to implement this type of program in their operations. So if you take a look at this picture on the left side, this is our planter at ATI that we've been enhancing over the last several years. We've got a seed squirter system installed on this planter that's giving us a lot of options in terms of what we can do, but there's a wide range of other in-furrow systems that are on the market right now. And the idea is that these in-furrow systems are placing fertilizer in the furrow with the seed. And so when we talk about in-furrow starters, this is what I'm focused on here. I'm not going to be talking about starter fertilizers that are put 2x2 or something along those lines. So there's a lot of potential benefits and trade-offs to placing fertilizer in the seed. And I want to start with some of the reasons why people are interested in this type of technology. First, it makes sense that when you've got a small seedling with a very limited root system, we want to be able to provide all of the resources that young seedling needs to get a good start. And this is particularly important when we consider early planting, relatively cool soils, and small root systems. And if we think about that in conjunction with some of our non-mobile nutrients like phosphorus or some of our micronutrients, can we, by placing them close to the root system, enhance a crop response? Some of the other questions that kind of follow along with this are, is there an opportunity to reduce some of our overall phosphorus inputs and thus save some money and protect water quality? So this is kind of where a lot of folks begin to talk about the benefits of in-furrow application. But as with anything, there's the possibility of drawbacks. And some of the ones that I think are relevant to consider are the relatively high cost per pound of nutrient that you're putting down in furrow. For example, if you take a 5-gallon application rate of 1034O, that gives you 6 pounds of nitrogen and roughly 20 pounds of phosphorus, and that's being applied at about $12 to $15 per acre. There are cheaper ways to get fertilizer out there more efficiently. The other thing that is of real concern, particularly when we're talking about putting fertilizers in the furrow next to the seed, is the risk of salt injury. And this is exacerbated by dry soils or higher than recommended application rates. And then probably a more relevant consideration for most folks is the fact that there's a nice body of research that has shown that the yield benefits of applying fertilizers in furrow are relatively low, particularly when you broadcast fertilizer in advance. And so we're going to take a look at some of those questions and see examples from some of our field work. So Steve mentioned the work of Jay Johnson, who's one of our predecessors. And one of the interesting things that he did that we decided to take advantage of was there was a field site at our western branch that had not received any P or K going back to 1994. So we had basically 20 years of crop removal reducing our P and K levels on that site. So we recognized that as an opportunity. If we were going to see a response to starter fertilizers on their own, this would be the site to see it on. We also looked through a wide range of other sites, and we identified a field at our northwest site that had relatively low phosphorus levels, but adequate, even high potassium levels. So we decided to develop some trials for those two sites. So to start off with, I want to talk a little bit about the treatments that we imposed at the South Charleston site. First, if you look at the first three treatments, these are our controls. These didn't receive any pre-plant broadcast fertilizer at all. And then we subdivided that and looked at the effects of no in-furrow starter, in-furrow liquid 28, and in-furrow ammonium polyphosphate, so 1034O. In those treatments, we applied them at roughly the maximum recommended rate for an in-furrow treatment, and then we applied side dress nitrogen to balance all of the treatments at 180 pounds of nitrogen per acre. In the second group of treatments, treatments 4 through 6, we applied broadcast phosphorus. And because we didn't want to unbalance the nitrogen, we decided to use triple superphosphate as our phosphorus source. And then the same three in-furrow treatments. 7 through 9, we applied potassium at the tri-state recommended levels pre-plant. And that was 60 pounds of K2O. And then for treatments 10 through 12, we applied both phosphorus and potassium together in addition to our three in-furrow treatments. So what did we see? So in the first year of this study, we saw some interesting results. And bear in mind, these are, particularly for our controls, these have not received any P or K in more than 20 years. So our yields were quite low for our controls, and we saw some modest increases in yield that were not quite significant of applying the in-furrow starters. So what we've got here are 106 bumping up to 115 and up to 133 with either 28 or 1034O. In the treatments that we applied phosphorus, we saw some marginal increases in yield, but again, not significant. This is a broadcast phosphorus. We saw more consistent increases when we applied broadcast potassium, and then an effect of adding both the P and K brought us up to about 170, 171 to 174. Now, what you can also see is instances where we applied 28 with potassium fertilizer alone or potassium and phosphorus. We saw actually significant reductions in yield. So what's going on here? We saw very clear evidence of fertilizer injury. We can see on the top there, the uninjured row, coming up just like we'd expect in the treated row with potassium broadcast with 28, delayed emergence, poor consistency of emergence. And if we dug a little deeper, we saw scorched root tips, we saw radicals that were inhibited, and in general, patchy emergence and stunted plants. And we captured some of that data just by taking simple stand counts, and we did find that we saw roughly 5,000 fewer plants emerging in those treatments that received both the 28 and the potassium fertilizer that was broadcast. And given the conditions of that year, which were relatively dry in the month of June, after planting, we only saw about an inch and 6/10 of rainfall right after planting this experiment. It kind of made some sense. We've got dry conditions. We've got combination of products that you would expect to see injury. And why would 28, which is ammonium, or it's urea ammonium nitrate, and potassium chloride, cause this issue? Why, when they're applied together, are we more likely to see a negative response? Well, it comes down to the salt content. And if you look at the relative saltiness of different fertilizer products, you can see where we're coming from. So if you compare the saltiness of triple superphosphate to potassium chloride, you've got a difference in their salt index of about 12 times. With your in-furrow product, urea ammonium nitrate, 28%, was about 3 times as salty as ammonium polyphosphate. So that combination of 28 and potash was really the kind of perfect confluence of events, coupled with our dry conditions, gave us the results that we saw. Now, it's important to note that you're not going to see this every year. You're not always going to get an inch and a half of rain in June. And the following year, we imposed the same treatments again, repeated the same experiment, and we saw very similar results in response to the broadcast treatment, but we didn't see the salt injury that we saw the previous year. And the main reason being we received more than 4 inches of rain in June, that second year of the trial. And our emergence was consistent across all of the treatments. So we feel pretty confident that this was a case of salt injury in 2016. Now, we did a variation on the same experiment in Custer, Ohio. This is a site that has much heavier clay soils, Hoytville clays, and the short response to what we found there is we didn't see any response to broadcast P, and we actually focused that study entirely on P, not potassium. And we also didn't see any significant effect on the in-furrow starters, and no evidence of salt injury. Now, we have a couple of explanations for kind of these results. In general, phosphorus responses to fertilizer are pretty infrequent. And if we think back to the studies that Steve just shared with us, responses to P fertilizer at that site, at our Northwest site, were pretty infrequent. We also are less likely to see salt injury on those heavier clay soils which retain a lot more water and have, frankly, more drainage problems. And also just keep in mind, responses to phosphorus, even broadcast phosphorus, are pretty infrequent. If you look at all of Steve's data, both from the on-farm trials and the research station trials, if you tally up all of those results, we get around 15% of sites are responsive to phosphorus and 10% of sites are responsive to potassium. So in general, what we're seeing here is not out of the range of what we would expect. I should also mention that if you look at the literature and see where they've been doing this type of research throughout the Midwest, the largest volume of work is actually coming out of Minnesota right now, so over the last 10 to 15 years. And they've actually found very similar results. This illustration right here shows some of the more recent findings. They basically took a look at roughly 40 site years worth of data. We did 4 site years, so not anywhere near as much work as they put in. And they basically found that when you've got low P testing soils, adding some in-furrow starter phosphorus in the form of 10-34-0 does offer some benefits in terms of yield. But those benefits largely go away when you are broadcasting phosphorus before planting. And then if you move up to a site with medium phosphorus testing site, so above the critical level that Steve discussed, the possible benefits of starter P actually are diminished even further. So the story here is they offer some benefits in certain circumstances, but if you're above that critical threshold, I wouldn't expect a lot of yield improvement. So what are the take-home messages here? One, if you're broadcasting P, it's unlikely that you're going to see a yield gain to in-furrow application. And you might have more of a chance of seeing that on a low testing site. If it's above the critical threshold, it's unlikely. 2, let's be cognizant of the risks of using in-furrow starters, particularly 28, and particularly after broadcasting potassium. That combination is putting you in a position where if you get a dry spring, you're going to be likely to see injury. If you've got low P testing sites, or even on the margin, just maybe over the critical level, you may be able to reduce your expenditures on broadcast P by reducing the rate or eliminating it altogether. But the likelihood of seeing a large response is pretty low. So if you do choose to use in-furrow starters, some of the common sense recommendations that I'd leave you with: avoid using in-furrow starters after broadcast potassium in general. Choose a low salt product if you do. So these would be examples. 1034Os, relatively low salt, but there's other products on the market. 6246, it's 918.9, not 981.9. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Yeah, sorry about that. And then never apply these in-furrow products above what they're listed at as their maximum rate, because you're just going to enhance the risk.